Okay, thank you everyone for joining in our evening session tonight. I always appreciate those who make time in the evening for continued learning. So we appreciate you and your commitment to learning and doing even better for our young people. So thank you for being here. The session we are in today is Becoming a Better Mentor, Strategies to Be There for Young People, Chapter 1, Providing Emotional Support and Empathy. I am Renee Angela Mock. I'm the Director of Operations and Training here at Mentor Maryland, DC. And my colleague, Kiana Bermudez, is here. She is the Program Outreach and Support Manager for Maryland. So if you are a program in Maryland, I hope you know Kiana. And if you don't, I hope you get to know her. And she is helping me this evening as we are transitioning to this new tech of WebEx. So she's practicing and she'll be toggling my slides for me today. So thank you for being patient. And Kiana, if you want to shout yourself out, feel free to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Renee, for that introduction. As Renee said, Program Outreach and Support Manager. If you need any resources for a mentoring program or you serve young people, I'm your go-to person. I am your point of contact and would love to be connected with you. So let me know and we'll go ahead and kick off.
Thank you, Kiana. If you want to move to the next slide. So if you're not aware of who we are Mentor Maryland, DC. We are your regional affiliate of the National Mentoring Partnership. We have been here doing the work since 2018, and we expanded into DC in 2021. And our shared goal across all of the affiliates, there's many regional affiliates, but through the National Mentoring Partnership, is to increase the quality and quantity of mentoring relationships across the country and to close the mentoring gap. So that gap being that there are not enough caring adults for young people to be in relationship with. So we do that in a lot of ways, and our next slide will show you a little bit more specifically about what all of those are. And again, when I think about what we have to offer and what Kiana was just offering, a lot of those things are here on this slide. So that includes connection with the National Mentoring Partnership, which I've mentioned. They do tons of research in the field of mentoring, essentially set the standard for best practices and do trainings. If you were at the National Mentoring Summit, it's every year in January in DC. Look for us there. Another major offering of ours is no-cost technical assistance through the National Mentoring Resource Center. Kiana is also your point person for that and getting into that. I also want to always uplift the Mentoring Connector, which is the nation's largest database for programs to advertise their mentoring opportunities and also the opportunities for young people to be mentees. We here at Mentor Maryland, DC manage the regional version of the Mentoring Connector, so on Maryland and DC. And of course, we do things like this. So this training is in partnership with the Y of Central Maryland. We do all kinds of professional development. We have regional roundtables as well, where you might see Kiana or some of my other colleagues. So this is for us to be in community to continue that quality piece of the work. So I don't want to get too much into all the other things when you get these slides, which you will, so don't worry about that. You will get these slides within a week, and all of these links are clickable. So I hope you click through and see what else we may have to offer. But now we're going to get into logistics because I know we're on a platform that is new for a lot of folks. We are in WebEx today. Again, we appreciate you being here. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see this mute where you can turn on your video. You won't need to share anything, so don't worry about that. You can see where you can raise your hand, that little hand, and then an emoji as well, which we love. I'm gonna click forward, KB.
I promise you I'm trying. My mouse and my arrow aren't doing anything for some reason. Ooh, okay. They suddenly went forward a lot.
Okay, you're good.
Apologies for that delay.
No problem. So if you'll on the bottom right of your screen, you should see this participant, so you can see who else is here in the chat. That's where you can send messages to individuals or to everyone. You can click them through, KB, and I'll let you know. So there's the chat right there. You send emojis in there. You can add people. You can send GIFs. So get into it. Go ahead, KB. Look through the rest right on this slide.
See them in here.
There you go. So we are using something called Slido today. And if you want to open Slido now, you can open it in your browser. We'll also there's an integration with WebEx, but this is just an interactive tool for us to connect with you and for us to get engaged in the content. Your engagement in the content is our priority. You know, it's how we measure learning and how you'll be able to retain what we've talked about today to take these lessons with you. It's also how we track your engagement to earn Credly badges, which I've been meaning to make a slide about, but you will get a Credly badge for being here today, assuming you're here for the entire length of the training. And this is essentially a digital credential that says that you were here, what you learned, and what skills you built in this session. So participating today will really be really important for that. And KB, can I ask you to go over the community standards, because I got an email from somebody trying to get in.
Yep, I got you. All right, so here at Mentor Maryland DC, we have a few community standards that we like to ground any of our gatherings in. And these are just things we're all agreeing to as we enter this space. So we're going to all agree to uphold these. Our first is that our community is open to all, but we also acknowledge the deep-seated racism, sexism, homo and transphobia, misogyny, and ableism that is pervasive in our country. We stand against these isms and actively work to this aim, especially with our young people. This means we must acknowledge that we also approach our work differently and beautifully. So we know that we all enter this space differently, and we want to make sure that everyone knows that this is welcome for everyone. We also want to share openly and listen more, about even further listen more openly, but also be open when you're sharing might hurt. And what we mean by that is we know that sometimes one person's like, wow, that was such a good point moment might be someone else's like, ouch, I don't know how that sat. Which brings us to our third point, which is be generous with positive assumptions, but don't be afraid to ask genuine questions. No matter what your role here is today, be a host. This is my personal favorite. We like to say that while we might be facilitating this space, we are all hosts in this space. So we all get what we all put into this space. So as long as you're entering the space, engaged and excited to be here, hopefully we all feel that. And hopefully as all being hosts for this space, we make it what we would love it to be. We don't endeavor to create safe or comfortable spaces, but rather brave spaces where comfort can be explored and beliefs and practices challenged. We also want this community and experience to be supportive, supportive and educational, but also fun. So please bring your present self. It is welcome here. If you prefer to engage in the chat or use little reactions or come off mute and be like, wow, that was such a good point, I have something to share, please do that. We want this to be engaging for all of us. And lastly, no fixing, saving, advising, or correcting each other. We want to make sure we're turning to wonder in a lot of these things. So especially with those positive assumptions, and if you have questions, and if you're not sure why someone said something, it's okay to ask. It's okay to say like, hey, what did you mean by that? And if you feel like any of these community standards were not held, please directly message me or Renee, and we can handle that. But in order for us to all be on the same page and feel safe in the space, we just want to make sure that we have some community standards that we can go over with you guys. Does that all sound good to everyone? You can give me a little thumbs up, some nods. Cool, thank y'all.
Thank you, Kiana. Melissa, I see you with the hand there. And we can move to the next slide, and you should see on the right side of your screen what we're calling our effective opener, so a survey of questions. But if you don't see that, go to slido.com, enter, type in hashtag BBM empathy, and the passcode will also be empathy, and that's how you will interact with the survey of questions. I'm going to give you a minute or so to answer those questions, and then we will review our answers together so we can get to know each other, so we can get us practicing a little bit empathy with each other. And we do that by learning about each other and get to know each other's stories and experiences, connecting over shared experiences, and connecting over our different experiences as well. So because we'll be engaging in this topic deeper later in the session, I want us to ensure that we're feeling a bit of connection, even though we're in this virtual space, even though it's the evening after maybe a long day, that we do have some connection there. So I'll give you a minute or so to engage there. I see somebody in there. We'll give you some time to answer those questions. So again, you can go, if you don't see it on the right side of your screen, you should be able to. Thank you for letting me know, Joka, no problem. You can go to slido.com, or you can engage on your screen. And I'm actually going to type in my answers too. And your join code is BBM Empathy, and then you enter the passcode after that. A few folks in there. Give a little bit more time. There we go. Let's start to click through, Kiana. And you can still answer even as we're reviewing our answers. So, first question, you're born and raised in Maryland or DC. Wow, this is a majority no, which has not yet happened when I've asked this question to groups. Very interesting. If you'd love to shout out where you were born, feel free to come off mute and let us know. But we appreciate you making your way to Maryland to be here at this time in this training. Love that. Go ahead and click, KB. English is your second language. Majority no. This is the most yes that I've seen in a group. If you'd like to come off mute and share what your first language is, we'd love to know.
Well, I'm curious to know, are there any other Southerners in here with me?
I'm from South Carolina.
Me too. What part?
I'm from Welford, Spartanburg, Greenville.
Spartanburg.
Okay. But I live
Way
in
from New York.
yes, I haven't lived there in a little while, about over
Me
20
neither.
years, but I'm in Maryland now.
Same.
Yeah.
I'm in Baltimore.
Okay.
Good to meet another.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
That's funny. That was not planned, everyone.
Exactly. And that's the power of us kind of going through these questions, right? Finding our shared experiences. Let's
So
see our
you,
next question. Oh, go ahead, Deidre.
oh no, I was going to say you probably went to either Dorman or Spartan High.
I lived close to Dorman, but I actually went to Oak Brook Preparatory School, and yeah, my family, like I was born in Mary Black Hospital.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah,
I
I used to like that hospital better than Spartanburg Regional.
too. Teacher, I'll email you. This sounds like a really sweet connection.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
You have written a letter to someone in the last year. Majority no. This is more no's than I've seen in this question before. If you have written a letter to someone, yeah, James, no problem. Thank you. If you did write a letter to someone, let us know in the chat who you wrote a letter to. Oh, it's evening out. Even more people are writing letters. Love this. Wow, 100% yes. That's crazy. I've never seen that for any question ever. Love that. You know, when I was answering it, I was like, do I love to sing and dance? I had to question and I was like, it is true. Apparently it's true for all of us. Man, we should be in person so we can be doing some singing and dancing. Dang. I'll plan better for next time. Love to know that we have some fun people in here. You believe that popcorn is, oh, James would love to himself. Thanks, James. So interesting. I'd love to hear more about that. You believe popcorn is best made on the stove. This is also the most no's that I've seen. I would like to hear from my yes people because I am a yes person. And I'd also love to know if anybody's heard of the Whirly Pop, which is my stovetop device of choice to make popcorn. Oh, it's going down. Less and less of us are making popcorn the old-fashioned way. Please share your popcorn opinions because they're vital to our survival of still having good popcorn. I feel like movie popcorn is getting worse as well. I could talk about popcorn opinions for a long time, but let's go to the next slide. You have failed a class. This is also an interesting split that I've not seen before. Yeah, I would love to hear more about that experience. Feel free to drop in the chat or come off mute. Everyone, I failed a class and it sucked. Oh, we're moving on. You had a negative relationship with adult growing up. Wow, this is my biggest yes that I've also seen. And this is interesting because we are going to talk about this topic today, right? Relationships with adults. But also we're going to hopefully talk about what our positive relationships with adults, which hopefully some of us had. what that was like and what they did and how we can do that for young people. Thank you. And then our last question. Wow, another 100. This is so, I love you guys. I'm loving this group. I'm so glad to hear this, that everyone's life has a calling. And yeah, that makes me feel really good. Actually makes me feel really hopeful. I can get emotional about that. If you want to let us know what your calling is in the chat, please do. I appreciate you all. And I love that whatever your calling is, you ended up here tonight. That's awesome. Okay. So like I said, we are discussing chapter 1 of a resource called Becoming a Better Mentor. This was a resource created by the National Mentoring Partnership, which I mentioned earlier. And this is an evidence-based resource on actions that mentors can take to be better, right? And each chapter is written by different experts and academics and people who have done research in the field, and also practitioners, right? People who are doing the work. And this particular chapter was written by Renee Spencer. So thank you, Renee Spencer. So just a little bit of agenda, what is a snapshot of what we're going to be learning today? And that is, we are going to be working to understand your mentees' experiences from their point of view, and how that can improve their reception of your support and greaten your impact. Awesome. Let's go to our next question. So in your own words, how would you define empathy? And I'm asking this to see what is our baseline understanding of empathy, and because empathy can be social and cultural, and we all have our own lens that we bring. So I'm going to ask you to write your definition of empathy. When you think of empathy, what comes to mind? How would you describe it? So if you don't see the Slido on the side of your screen, go to slido.com and proceed to enter the codes there. In your own words.
A few folks who maybe weren't able to type right now, like if you're, well, first off, if you're driving, please be safe. But if you're unable to type or something, feel free to come off mute and we can type it up for you.
Yeah, how would you define empathy? So James in chat said, empathy is the ability to provide support without judgment, right? So integral with support, right? Which is in the name of our chapter today. Louis says, feeling what others feel, accompanying them without judging or fixing. Wow, I love that word, accompanying. And I should be using it later in the training because that's a really good way to describe how we're going to talk about empathy today. Understand the other person and support them without trying to solve the problem for them. Boom. Love. Can't you imagine a young person right now saying that they don't like it when someone's trying to solve their problem for them or telling them what to do? Taking other people's feelings into consideration and showing support to them. I wrote in the chat, feeling and understanding what others feel, being able to comfort them. Caring or having a certain feeling when someone is going through something. Ooh, you guys are good, which is great. That's what I want to hear. And of course, I wasn't necessarily expecting anybody to come today and really have no clue or to be unsuccessful at practicing empathy, right? This is for us to ground our empathy practice and to expand it and to really be intentional with how we build empathy in relationships and knowing, right, why it is so important, which is what we're going to talk about next on this next slide. What is the empathy definition that we're working from today, and why? Why should we do it, right? So empathy is being open to imagining another person's experience from their point of view and striving to find points of connection. So again, we're going to keep that definition in our minds today. And the empathy loop is perceive what others are feeling, processing the information, and being responsive to the other's experiences. So this is what's happening when we are experiencing empathy for another person. So contemporary understanding of empathy is supported by neuroscience, and it recognizes that it requires thinking and feeling, both of those things, right? It's not just about emotions. And it involves trying to understand a person's experience from their point of view, which you saw a lot in your definitions, which is great, and connecting with what they are feeling, which we also saw in your definitions, which is wonderful. And the first step in feeling is feeling empathy, right? We feel it first, but we have to go beyond just feeling and go to this being responsive, right? How can we be responsive to the person's experience? So when we are getting to know people and thinking about building a relationship with our mentee, our brains naturally look for similarities because we're trying to find points of connection, and it's often easiest to build points of connection on things that are simple, right? We saw Kiana and Deetra connect quickly, right? And now they're going to follow up, and who knows what's going to happen. But they're able to do that because they had that shared experience. But when our brains perceive difference, or there is difference, right, it becomes more difficult to build those points of connection. And this is where empathy becomes more of a practice, right? And we're practicing today. To expand our empathy, we have to do more learning and engaging with people who are different than us. And when we do that, it will be easier to build relationships with folks who are different than us. What we know about empathy is empathy allows us to see people for who they are and help them realize their potential. And I know with our young people, potential is something that we talk about a lot, right? We want to build our young people's potential and ensure they have everything they need to reach their potential. So why does empathy matter? Empathy matters because it makes meaningful connections between people possible, right? It has been identified as a key agent in the promotion of effective relationships. So the benefits of being empathic in your mentoring relationship are undeniable. Like they're there. It helps them, your young person, feel emotionally supported by you, to feel heard, understood, responded to, and even respected by you, right? And from a young person's point of view, respect is one of the most important features of an effective relationship with an adult. So you can, if your young person's feeling respected, which you can do by practicing really quality empathy, your relationship is more likely to be quality, right? When someone is empathic with us, it allows us to feel comfortable and even safe enough to be open to accepting help, which I also saw in your definitions, right? That somebody is feeling comfortable that you can guide them and that you can accompany them along a journey and not necessarily solve their problem, but essentially receive help. And I'll say something that I continue to hear in spaces where well-intentioned people are trying to help young people is that their barrier is that they say that the young person doesn't want to receive the help, to which I say, why? They don't have to, right? You have a relationship with them. Who are you to them, right? Before we even know the young people who come to our programs, we love them and we are ready to serve, but we have to build that relationship, and empathy and support are the foundation of that. And we are building those connections so a young person actually feels open to accepting help, that there's trust, that there is care, and that is really that kind of piece there. And again, we think about the benefits of empathy for young people. Empathy promotes better relationships for young people with other types of adult figures, right? So teachers, social workers, doctors. So essentially, if you are practicing empathy with this young person, they are more likely to interact with other adults in their lives in a more positive way. And again, when we go back to that respect piece, research says that patients treated with greater empathy by their doctors are more likely to trust their doctor and have better health outcomes, right? So again, that trust piece is really, really important. The last thing I want to say about that is that while most people are born with a capacity for empathy, right? Again, I know you all have it, which is why I suspect that you are here. Some people have more empathy than others naturally, right? But the evidence shows that there is an effectiveness of empathy training and learning, which is why we do sessions like this, which is why if any of you supervise mentors, we should do sessions about empathy, right? And it is a skill that has a great capacity to grow. And that is what should be, I hope, is reassuring to you. For those of you who are already out there practicing empathy, that we can continue to grow and hone our empathy skills. What does it look like in practice? Go ahead, Gibby. So, I'm probably okay. James, go ahead and put your question in the chat. So empathy can be shown in your overall approach to taking a relationship and also in small everyday exchanges with your mentee. Again, being empathic with someone whose experiences may be quite different than ours requires more work, more effort. And it is frequently true in mentoring, right? In many cases, mentees and mentors have quite different experiences. And often that can be even the purpose of a program, right? To connect people who are different. But even if you do identify with your mentee on certain demographics or experiences, the one experience you'll never share is being their age in 2025, right? So we always have to acknowledge that there is a difference, but we can still build connection. So regardless if you are working to connect across similarities or differences, empathy can be distilled down to two sets of processes that we're going to talk about: perspective taking and adaptability. So perspective taking, is the ability to step outside of our own experiences and take our mentees or even our mentees' family, right, their point of view. So this has also been referred to as decentering, which you may have heard in other kinds of mentoring trainings, right? That in a mentoring relationship, the mentor is decentering themselves and focusing on the mentee. And this requires us to set aside our own values, beliefs, and worldviews and centering the thoughts and experiences of the other person, or in this case, the mentee. And James, I want to look at your question real quick before I move on. Yeah, I imagine there is. I don't know a lot about the data behind emotional IQ, but I would imagine that somebody with a high emotional IQ is pretty good at empathy. And I would say that, again, empathy is a skill. Emotional IQ is something that you can build. And again, I hope that is reassuring. So when we hit stumbling blocks with our young people that we work with, that we know that we can work through them and get through those fumbles and do a little bit better. So one of the ways that we can kind of practice perspective taking is through this ABC model. So we acknowledge our own responses to the other person. We breathe deeply to ground ourselves and not let our emotions overtake us. This helps us make space for being curious about the other person's experience and trying to understand things from their point of view. I'm thinking about TikTok right now. People say, I'm an empath, and like they're really like overly emotionally identifying. And that it's great. We want to, again, feel the feelings of another person, but we don't want them to be effective. We don't want them to overtake us, right? And that is why this tool tends to come in. So here. Let's just talk this one out instead of doing this little waterfall activity. I want to ask the question: when was the last time you did, or maybe you should have, used this ABC model? Because now that you see it, you might think that, oh, this is something that I have done before with my young people. Or you might be thinking of a situation where, man, I wish I had taken a beat to acknowledge the young person's experience, to take a breath, and to be curious. So is anything coming to mind when you think about a time where you should have used the ABC model, or maybe you did use it? How did that go? Feel free to just come off mute or write in the chat. What do you think, Amy? Anything coming up?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing that came to mind for me, honestly, is some of our interactions, Renee. So Renee and I work together probably most closely on our team. Renee kind of works closely with everyone as our operations person. But Renee, if you don't mind me sharing, so Renee is very open about being neurodivergent. And sometimes something we've learned is we just work very differently and we think very differently. And so a lot of times that'll be asking questions. And especially as we know, something my therapist always reminds me of is that tone is not delivered over message, right? When we type or we text, you can't really, you don't know what that tone is like. And so I think a lot of times, whether it's me asking a question of Renee or Renee asking a question of me or whatever it is, being able to pause, think about what might be actually going on without making an assumption and being like, oh, this is genuinely just a question. How can I just answer the question and connect next time in person, because we know we work well together. So that's maybe a small example, but yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind for me.
Yeah, for me, I think about the many times that I do not do this with my husband, right? We react, we're both ADHD, so we ADHD people are reactive. We react very quickly, right? And we're jumping to jumping to conclusions, jumping to the end, and with a worry or something like that, instead of taking a beat and thinking about the other person first, or being more curious, or being too curious first, but we've not done this other piece where we're acknowledging the other person's experience and we're just, persisting a little much. So I want you to think more about that. And we're going to, oh, Amanda, let's see in the chat. I did this today with one of my mentees. She was feeling down because of her grades this quarter and school year. She came in our meeting in a tizzy, and I feel like my reaction really fit the ABC framework. Yeah, exactly. And this is actually, we're going to see something like this in our next scenario. So we can go to the next slide. And we'll just one at a time, KB. So our scenario, you are a mentor to a 15-year-old mentee named Alex who has been feeling overwhelmed with schoolwork and family responsibilities. Alex has just shared with you that they are struggling to keep up with their assignments and feel like they are letting everyone down. So how can you acknowledge Alex? What would you say? Or Amanda, what did you say when your young person came in this kind of tizzy, as you said?
Um, at first, I feel like I really did have to take a breath because she was going pretty fast, and I was just like, okay, like, hold on. And then, the first question I asked her, I was like, well, I mean, why do you care? Like, I mean, is it the reaction that you're going to get from your parents, or is it, I asked her questions and kind of got her to think about it. Um, in a bigger picture sense.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, right, that's kind of that be curious. You're being curious in that moment because you've
Mhm.
noticed how they've come in. You're acknowledged that, like, this seems important to you in some way. Why? Right? And that's when we get to that be curious. So let's go to breathe next, Kiana. So sometimes we feel like we might need to breathe first, right? And this is something that we also refer to in attunement, which is another Becoming a Better Mentor chapter, right? Taking that moment to attune with your own feelings, take a breath, or in this kind of scenario, inviting the young person to take a breath if they are, in kind of an anxious moment, as it seemed like that was happening with your mentee today, Amanda, right? Inviting them
Mhm.
to take a breath with you.
Mhm.
And then lastly, can we go to be curious, KB? So in this scenario, we could ask Alex, can you tell me more about what's been going on? What specific challenges are you facing with your schoolwork and family responsibilities? Because when we read this scenario, it's not necessarily unique, right? Kid goes to school and is overwhelmed. And for those of us who have been working in the field for a while or have worked with many young people, we may think we already know the answer and how to help and this about why they feel this way and things like that. But even with what Amanda said and what her questions were, right, why? Why is this important to you? Um, and being curious about what specific challenges, right? What are you facing at school? What are you facing with your family as I bring up these kinds of different pieces and being curious about every part of what they've shared with you. So yes, Amanda, well, I'm not saying I'm glad that happened, but that's a great story that I might use in a future training. But a really good example of how we can use that ABC and what we might want people to do with us too, right? And yeah, that it can be mutual as well, as Kiana said in her story. So yeah, thank you for sharing, Amanda. We're going to watch this wonderful video that is from Brene Brown, who is a researcher in the social space. I would encourage you to take some notes. You'll be able to, again, you'll get this video. It'll be part of the slides to be able to watch it again if you'd like. But she's going to talk about her definition of empathy and how it kind of matches up with ours. And then I'll ask you, we'll debrief the video after that. So.
And but how are you doing so well?
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Thank you. Okay, we're not jumping to the next slide just yet. Yes, I get something new out of that video every time I watch it. And what stuck out to me today, and I'd love to hear what stuck out for you, was she talks about why empathy is vulnerable and potentially uncomfortable, right? Because when you're trying to connect about that feeling, you have to remind yourself of what that feels like. So you can do that accompanying that we're talking about. So we can do that acknowledgement of that we talked about as well. And you heard her say perspective taking. So that is what potentially holds folks back, right, from really engaging in empathy, or if we're working with young people who are going through it, right? And we're going to hear things that might be hard to hear. So I'm going to drop some questions in the chat, and I would love to hear, can you describe a time someone practiced empathy with you well? So they were doing a good job and you felt it. Or can you describe a time when somebody was practicing sympathy with you, which you talked about? And if somebody was practicing sympathy, how did it feel? Feel free to come off mute, write in the chat. A time someone practiced empathy with you well, or a time when somebody was practicing sympathy with you and how that felt.
While folks are typing, I can share a story. Quite a few years ago, I left a job without having another job in place, which was scary. And someone very close to me at the time, when I was, doing the normal, like, did I do the wrong thing? A panic. Their response was, well, at least you have something saved. And that didn't feel good. That was it felt really, it didn't quite acknowledge my concern, right? My concern was so much more than just like, oh yeah, sure, I have a little bit saved, but that's not, I just don't feel good. I feel unsure. And I really wish someone would just sit with me and be unsure with me. Which is a great anecdote to what was just in the chat.
Yeah, Jim's referring to, right, what it feels like when someone's practicing empathy well, comforting because they're listening and they cared. And I think in your story, Kiana, right, you talk about somebody being dismissive. So that opposite of acknowledgement, they weren't acknowledging what you were actually feeling, which was that you were nervous about the choice you made, but they were trying to do that reassuring and kind of trying to jump to solving a problem, which of course we love to do. We don't want people to suffer, right? We don't want our young people to be going through it. We want to solve the problem so they don't have any problems. Anybody who's a parent knows that, right? Like we do that for our children. We don't want them to suffer and face issues. But when we do that acknowledgement, we are sitting with them as they're maybe in an uncomfortable space, which is kind of what you were feeling in that story. Yes, thank you for sharing. And let us move to our next slide where we're going to talk about adaptability. I was slide ahead. Okay. So this is kind of, again, our kind of second tool as far as it comes to practicing empathy. So to be empathic, you must communicate or show your mentee this by being responsive to their experiences, which we heard in our original definition of empathy. Go ahead and click, KB. So adaptability, a word we're probably likely familiar with, adjusting our approach, right? Being flexible, being able to attempt to adjust our attitude or our behavior and how we're responding to a situation that might be fighting a potential reflex, right? Or our reflex to do some writing, which we'll talk about, to do some correcting or problem solving. So being adaptable to in the moment of what you may be able to do. Go ahead. And then we think about new mentors, or if you are a new mentor or in a new relationship, this involves kind of letting go of those initial expectations that we might be bringing. So for those of you who prepare mentors or their service, right, with young people, setting them up to let go of some expectations can be really important. And to quote a new mentor that was interviewed for this research, they said, I might have some expectations, but I really can't say it will happen like I want. So I'm just waiting to see what's going to happen and kind of adapt to what I need for my mentee, right? We come into new situations or new relationships, we can't help but have expectations or desires of how it's going to go. But if we're going to really practice empathy, we're going to need to remain adaptable and be ready to adjust our approach to serve our mentee. Because remember, we're decentering and prioritizing our mentee. So I want to ask you this question. Can you think about a time that you were adaptable in a relationship? Again, I'm sure many of you have done this in some shape or form, but maybe you didn't have the full context of why that was successful. So when you think of a time that you were adaptable in a relationship. It doesn't necessarily have to be a mentoring relationship, it can be any relationship. One that comes to mind for me, I remember last year around this time, I had made a new friend that I was really excited about. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this person. It's so exciting. I have a new friend, blah, blah, blah. But I also knew that they weren't super loving being in Baltimore. And I found out that they were moving, or they told me that they were moving. And I was just, my feelings were that I was very disappointed and upset because we had just met at this time. They're going to be gone by the summer, so like we wouldn't be able to do any cool, fun summer stuff. And I had to get through my feelings. I had to adapt and give myself the space to have my negative feelings without putting that on my friend, right? But then also, I had to adapt for what our relationship was going to be, which wasn't that he was going to live nearby, but that he was going to move back to his home, to another state, and that our friendship was going to look different, right? And I'm very happy that obviously, maybe it's obvious, I'm very happy that I was adaptable in that way, even though it was hard to do, because I still got to preserve the relationship with somebody I really cared about. Yeah, James. Recently, my friend lost her husband, and I sat and listened and provided a space for her to be safe so she could verbalize her feelings. Yes, again, we're going to hear this kind of over and over. And I know I'm going to say it again in a few slides, but right, really practicing empathy helps you provide that comfortable and safe space, right? And letting somebody talk through their own feelings can be really powerful. definitely in that situation. But for our young people, often adults aren't giving them tons of space to talk through their feelings and their points of view, right? They're often being told what to do. Um, and that kind of opportunity to do that can be really unique to their relationship with a mentor that they really aren't able to do with a lot of other adults in their life. So that space can be really, really important. And empathy allows us to create that space for our young people. Yeah, thank you for sharing, James. I appreciate that. We're going to talk about support real quick, as that's the other kind of topic in our session today. So, what about emotional support? So, I'm going to talk about support today in the framework of the developmental relationship framework, and you can go ahead and keep KB. So, the developmental relationship framework is a relationship building framework from Search Institute, who does tons of research. And what they know from this research is that adults who practice the developmental framework, which include these 5 elements, have positive relationships with young people, and those young people go on to have positive outcomes, which we love. And go ahead and click one more time, KB. So when we talk about, as it relates to emotional support, we're going to review express care and provide support, because that falls under kind of what we're talking about today. If you are interested in a full training on the developmental relationship framework, please let us know in the training survey. That will be emailed to you after this training. But again, we're going to talk about express care and provide support as it relates to emotional support. So we can go to the next slide. Yes. So these 5 elements are all written from the perspective of a young person. So we're going to start with express care. If somebody doesn't mind coming off mute and reading all the lines around express care, I would appreciate that to hear some other voices.
Show me that you like me and want the best for me. Be present. Pay attention when you are with me. Be warm. Let me know that you like being with me and express positive feelings towards me. Invest. Commit time and energy to doing things for and with me. Show interest. Make it a priority to understand who I am and what I care about. Be dependable. Be someone I can count on and trust.
Thank you so much, Deidre. Can I have one more person read provide support?
I can do that. Help me complete tasks and achieve goals. Encourage, praise my efforts and achievements. Guide, provide practical assistance and feedback to help me learn. Model, be an example I can learn from and admire. Advocate, stand up for me when I need it.
Thank you. So the way this framework is laid out is telling us exactly what to do, what actions we need to take, right? So what I want you to do with this information is to put this into your toolkit, right? Because what we know from this research is that young people are going to have different needs as it relates to each of the elements. So some young people are really going to need you to do this expressing care, right? Are going to need you to be really warm, to always be interested, and things like that. And other young people are going to need a lot of support, right? Because it also depends on what they're getting from the other adults in their lives. So I will send follow-up resources from the developmental relationship framework, which again, more tools in the toolkit of what I can do besides these actions that you can take, right? And again, we can imagine our mentee saying these lines at the top, right? Think about your mentee saying, show me that you like me and want the best for me. Look back and do some reflecting on your actions. Am I doing them? Right? Check in with your mentee about it, right? Do they know that you want the best for them? Because you may feel like it's obvious, because of course you want the best for them. I know that you all want the best for your mentees, but is your mentee really feeling that? And that is that missing piece that we can do by really providing intentional support and expressing care in a meaningful way. So take one last look at the slide, because we're going to talk about next is who in our lives did these things for us, right? Who was really good at expressing care to us growing up? And who was really good at providing support? Who comes to mind? There you go, Katie. Next slide.
Sorry, my cursor just keeps.
You're good. Okay, great. Folks already in here. So again, when we think of expressing care and providing support, who did this for you growing up and how did they do it? So Jim brings up parents and teachers and ministers. Louise is talking about her mother. Casa, Caroline, Melissa, and Ruth, feel free to continue to add. What I want us to think about again, not just who did it, what were the actions that they were taking that made you feel cared for, that made you feel supported? Because those are the things that we can emulate with our mentees, right? That we can take from their toolkit and apply to our own. So yeah, Jim, Joker says my father, a great listener. So somebody who made time to listen, maybe did more listening than talking, right? Might be what is what potentially you were looking for growing up, but our mentees could be looking for that as well. So yeah, Jim, I would ask, what were your parents and teachers and ministers, what were they doing that made you feel cared for and supported? How did you know that they cared about you and supported you?
Sure. Largely, it was much what we've been talking about. They listened. They showed great empathy. They didn't try to judge. They helped me explore options to the dealing with whatever issues I had at the time. So I think it was an openness of that connection rather than sort of providing a cookie cutter predetermined solution that, for example, teachers might apply to other students or ministers might apply to other youth, but it was focused on me specifically and my issues and where I was on any particular day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate you going into more detail there and sharing. And you brought up a good point, right? Not every adult that a young person interacts with is going to have the capacity to provide individual care and individual support. How many young people are in a classroom today with one teacher who has to do that for 35 students or however much? That can be really difficult. I worked at a mentoring program with 100 kids and there were like 4 staff people. Like that's a lot. To be able to try to ensure that each young person feels cared for and supported is a lot of effort. And that's what I mean about being intentional. And how can we do that in a broad sense if we do serve a lot of young people? But where it really seems to hit, right, is that individualized attention, individualized space for us, this adult, to get to know us and how to support us. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Does anybody else want to share from their notes here? Oh, Amanda. Amanda, you're teeing me up. Showing unconditional positive regard, sharing opportunities that are unique to my interests. So we are going to talk about unconditional positive regard in just a second, but you said sharing opportunities that are unique to my interests. So there's a few things I want to break down there. One, that they're paying attention to you, right? They know what your interests are. We saw on the previous slide, right? Showing that you are interested in the things that I am interested in, even if you're not really interested in it, right? If you're with your mentee, you're making space for their interest to be at the center because we're centering them. And this idea of sharing opportunities, this actually goes back to something I didn't talk about with the developmental relationship framework, which is what they call expanding possibilities. It's one of the elements, which is how do we broaden our young person's world so they can explore their interests in the greater world that they don't know about yet. And a mentor can be a really powerful person to do that because we have more experience, we have connections. So Amanda, it is great to hear that somebody was doing that for you. And again, that is something that we can hopefully do for our mentees. And it can really start with how are we going to know what a young person is interested in? Well, we're going to get to know them, we're going to get to know their interests, and we're going to make space for that because those are all things that happen over time, right? James mentioned, right, focusing on their strengths. Another thing that young people don't always get from every adult that they interact with. Again, if this is an adult that needs to control where they are, right, or what they're doing, right? A teacher has an agenda for the day and the end objectives and things like that, right? They need to refocus on, or get a young person to refocus on what is going on. So we might not always be able to, there might be more correcting and things going on rather than focusing on acknowledgement of strengths. So yeah, I appreciate that. And before we talk about unconditional positive regard, I want to talk about some common pitfalls. Yeah, go ahead, David. So, assuming that similar means same. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but a common pitfall is to assume that when you share similarities with another person, your experiences are the same. And again, this can be tricky early in a relationship when you're trying to find those points of connection to build the relationship. So we have to be careful not to overlay our own experiences for our young person and let our young person tell us who they are, right? And again, when we're in early relationship and we don't know this young person and we're trying to get to know them, it can feel impossible, right? How do I get to know someone who is nothing like me or we have nothing in common? What empathy says is that we can do it. We have to continue to be curious, right? And be patient and let the young person tell us who they are, be dependable, which we saw on the previous slide, to show interest, to be curious. So again, if you do seem very alike, we still want to be decentering ourselves. Go ahead, KB. Thinking you know best, so you may feel the urge to fix, right? We want to solve our young people's problems. And this is what we call the righting reflex, right? We want to get our young person on the right path. And the righting reflex is kind of a ubiquitous human experience, right? Many times we are pushed to this point where we are trying to do this right and get somebody on track. And when we do that, it can build tension. And this is where we need to do that ABC, right? We need to pause. We need to acknowledge what our young person is going through and their point of view. We need to be adaptable, and we need to listen and learn more about our mentee before we suggest a solution. Because again, what we saw all the way in the beginning with your definitions is not about solving their problems. It's that we're helping our young person solve their problem, and we also are making sure that our young person is even open to receiving our help. And we don't necessarily know that yet, but we're constantly engaging or indulging this righting reflex, it is probably going to build a division in the relationship. Blaming the parent, guardians, and family. So this, as somebody who's worked in a school, everybody's always blaming somebody else. Somebody's blaming teachers, somebody's blaming parents, I worked in an after-school program at a school, somebody's blaming the after-school program, somebody's blaming the principal, somebody's blaming the community, right? It's kind of this circle of blame. And what we want to be mindful of, the challenges that may be impacting our mentee's family, who we may not know, right, as well as our mentee. And we want to be mindful that when their circumstances are really different from our own, that this is another opportunity to be more curious about it and get to know your mentee's family and the people meaningful in their lives. So not appreciating the obstacles that a youth family might be going through, or a family who prioritizes things different than you. Again, we need to be curious rather than getting into a righting reflex that may allow us to extend blame. So extending your efforts at empathy to your mentee's family by striving to see things from their perspective can help you to be more open to seeing and understanding the family's challenges as well as their strengths, right? James, earlier, we're talking about being strengths focused. So being able to extend that to our mentee's family can help us see what those strengths are and the resilience, that they are facing in these despite, their challenges. So this can be difficult to do if you are at a mentoring program. If you run a mentoring program, again, it can be really powerful to build relationships between mentors and family members, mentors and teachers, mentors and the other caring adults in a young person's life. I worked at a program where we always discussed, that we were part of the village and we wanted to get to know the village, right? And that we wanted to get to know every adult who cared about this young person so we could collaborate rather than poke and tell who's doing what wrong and things like that. So that can be really powerful. So if you run a program, if you have influence over a program, I would encourage you to see where you can build those connections and again, kind of expand that opportunity for empathy. Drowning in emotions, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So you may have heard of the concept of compassion fatigue. So it is hard to be more open to more fully understanding someone else's experiences if we are too consumed in our own emotional reaction. And to be clear, it's fair to have an emotional reaction, right? Like that is a normal hey, sometimes we hear things that are tough, or we see somebody we care about going through something that is difficult. You are likely to have an emotional reaction. But it is that we are, putting up a little stopper before we become consumed, because once we're consumed by our own emotional reaction, we're not really able to decenter and focus on our mentee and what they're going through and doing that acknowledgement, right? This may be where we wanted to breathe first, right? To breathe through our emotional reaction so we can get to that space of acknowledgement and being responsive to our mentee. Then is our last one up, right? Expecting to be perfectly empathic. So again, I'm sure all of you, before you came here today, were practicing empathy and being empathetic people. And the reality is, and I hope what we're learning is here, that we can do even better, right? That this is a skill that we can strengthen. It may also give us some perspective of the times where maybe we didn't do super great at this, right? Maybe we missed the mark. And it's important with young people that we acknowledge when we miss the mark sometimes, when maybe we jump to the writing reflex and suddenly we're telling the mentee what to do and we catch ourselves. Young people appreciate when adults tell them that they've made mistakes, because young people want to know that it's when they grow up that they can make mistakes, it'll be okay. So this can be, acknowledging your mistakes with a young person can be really powerful, and also help your mentee have empathy for you, right? That you also make mistakes just like they can, and they can continue to be curious about you, and that empathy becomes mutual and bi-directional. So keeping those pitfalls in mind, because in just a second, we're going to go into a scenario. First, we're going to talk about the unconditional positive regard that Amanda mentioned. So we're going to watch about 2 minutes of this video.
Today you and tomorrow you aren't the same person. If you're tired of what Today You is doing, get an Accounting Fundamentals Certificate from WGU School of Business and get a whole new Tomorrow You in just 6 months. Enroll today at WGU.
Unconditional positive regard is a concept in humanistic psychology that refers to accepting and supporting another person without any conditions or judgments. This approach is fundamental in creating a safe and nurturing environment where individuals can explore and develop their true selves. The term unconditional positive regard was introduced by the influential psychologist Carl Rogers in the mid-20th century. Rogers, a pioneer in humanistic psychology, emphasized the importance of this concept in therapeutic settings. He believed that for individuals to grow and self-actualize, they need to feel valued and accepted without conditions. There are 5 main characteristics of unconditional positive regard. The first characteristic is acceptance without judgment. This means embracing the person as they are without evaluating or judging their behavior or feelings. This characteristic is about recognizing the intrinsic worth of the individual, regardless of their actions or thoughts. The second characteristic is consistent support. This involves providing continuous support regardless of the individual's actions, emotions, or thoughts. This unwavering support helps create a stable environment where the individual feels secure and valued. The third characteristic is empathy. This involves demonstrating a deep understanding and sharing the feelings of another without judgment. Empathy involves putting oneself in another's shoes and experiencing their emotions from their perspective, which fosters a deeper connection and understanding. The fourth characteristic is non-conditional care. This refers to offering care and support that does not depend on any conditions or prerequisites. This type of care is given freely and unconditionally, reinforcing the individual's sense of worth and security. The fifth characteristic is encouragement of authenticity. This is about encouraging the person to express their true self without fear of rejection or disapproval. This characteristic supports individuals in being genuine and authentic, which is essential for personal growth and self-acceptance. Here are 2 examples of unconditional positive regard. First,
Thank you, Kiana. So I hope, well, if you've not heard of unconditional
their clients' feelings
regard
and
before,
experiences.
this is a really good kind of quick way to absorb all of that information. But I hope when you hear this concept, well, one, that you can think of the people in your life that have unconditional positive regard to you. And I think another thing to think about is kind of how hard it is to really do unconditional positive regard, right? Those were a lot of steps that he broke down. But there are often times when our writing reflex will want to put up a condition, right? That like, you have to show up in this way, or I need to show up in this way for this relationship to continue. So unconditional positive regard really is a practice. And again, when that gets compounded with empathy, with providing support, it can really be powerful. So Amanda, if you don't mind me calling on you, I would love to hear about this adult who was showing you unconditional positive regard and kind of how they were doing it, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, definitely when I saw the video, I'm like, well, it was close. They tried, but yeah, I can think of instances. Something that came to mind, I thought of my parents, and especially my mom, and like just little things, getting in trouble in high school and like thinking it was the end of the world, and my mom being like, this doesn't affect your character. You're a good person, and that kind of thing. How much that meant to me to hear that in that moment.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I think you touched on, right, the power of that. When we do something wrong, when we make mistakes, we can be concerned about the folks that we're in relationship with. Are they still going to like me, care about me, want to show up for me, judge me, and all those kinds of things? And a lot of what the actions that Amanda talked about that we saw in the video, right, are aligned with the things that you said, right? Staying out of judgment and not being judgmental, not trying to solve problems for other people. So again, it is really powerful, hard to do perfectly, for sure. We can go in and out, and this is where we can acknowledge with our young person when maybe we're slipping up, and this can be kind of our goal, right, of how we want to show up. I would never say that it is easy to do, because I do not think it is easy to do. When I think of myself as a young person, I was not feeling very secure that many people had unconditional positive regard for me. And when earlier when we did that poll, right, a lot of us had negative relationships with adults. And the goal of Mentor MLADC and the goal of all your mentoring programs, right, is to reduce that so young people have more and more caring adults. But it can be hard to come by, and a mentor may be a unique person in a mentee's life that can really practice unconditional regard or unconditional positive regard for them. So for our last activity, we're going to go into breakout rooms and work through a scenario. But before we go through what that scenario is, I want to share a quick story that I think kind of relates to unconditional
Without
positive
judgment,
regard.
no matter what the
You good, Katie? Okay. So before we click on the scenario, I want to tell a story about a mentee that I had, and how I kind of responded to a scenario that he was in. So this is a young person that I was supposed to visit at school. I was his mentor advocate, and I went to his school, and the principal told me that he had been sent home because he punched someone in the face. So I said, thank you for letting me know. And I got back in my car, and I went to go visit that young person, and I actually picked him up, and I wanted to, let him know what that I had heard, right? So I said, hey man, I went to your school today, but I didn't see you there. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I saw your principal. And what do you think they told me? Right? Let him tell me the story. And he was honest, right? And he said, um, I punched someone today, right? And I gave him the space to tell me the full story. He knew that it was not the right thing to do, right? And if I maybe jumped into judgment, I would have been telling him, you shouldn't be doing that, blah, blah, blah. But he knew, right? And I gave him the space to tell me. And what he also knew is that I would continue to show up, that if I saw him walking down the street, I would pick him up, that I would hear him out, hear his point of view, even though I had talked to a very upset principal, just hours ago. And it really helped us, continue to be in relationship through hard times. This was a kid who was going through hard times, but the one thing that I always did was show up and make space for him to be himself and tell me who he was. So just want to kind of lay that out as a scenario that you've been through, but we're going to go through a scenario together. And in your breakout rooms, what I want you to do is to think about how you would respond, maybe script out what you would do, and go ahead and click, Kiana. The scenario that we're going to be working through is about a student named Alex. So Alex had always been a responsible student, but one day he decided to skip his afternoon classes to hang out with friends at a nearby arcade. It was a harmless decision, but it was against school rules. Alex thought he could get away with it, but his absence was noticed by his math teacher, Mrs. Thompson, who informed you, the mentor. So the question that I want you to consider is, with everything that we've discussed today, how would you apply those learnings to help Alex? So I sent a Google Doc in the chat, and you'll see the scenario and the question there for you. And you will also see a space for your group to kind of script out what, pardon me, what you would do, right? How would you apply what you've learned today to help Alex? So we are going to break out, and I'll let you and your group record your answers in the Google Doc, and then we will come back and share. So breakout rooms should be opening momentarily, and then let you all talk through your answers.